The white funeral tent breathed in the morning wind, canvas snapping softly like a warning nobody wanted to hear. Beneath it, rows of mourners sat in black silk and satin, their grief polished and expensive. Lilies crowded the air with sweetness sharp enough to sting. The ground smelled of wet soil and fresh-cut stems, as if the earth itself had been dressed for the occasion. At the front, the casket rested on its stand, dark wood gleaming. Two funeral attendants stood close, hands already placed along the lid, fingers spread as if they were about to seal it shut. One of them leaned in, checking the clasps. Metal clicked once, quiet but final. Reverend Howard's voice moved steadily over the crowd, a practiced cadence meant to guide everyone toward acceptance. His hands were folded, his eyes lowered. The prayer was almost finished. Then a voice split it open. He is still alive. The words did not drift. They struck. Every head snapped toward the sound. The choir lowered their hymn books in the same stunned motion. The attendants froze with their hands on the lid, caught mid-closure. The cemetery stopped breathing. Clarice Bennett stood at the edge of the tent on the gravel, breath tearing in and out of her chest like she had run through every red light in the city. Dust clung to her shoes. Her apron was wrinkled and twisted at the waist, the fabric creased like it had been yanked on in a hurry. Sweat darkened the hair at her temples. Her face looked too pale under the shadow of the canopy, except for the eyes. Her eyes did not apologize. Whispers rippled through the front row, quick and cutting. Who is she? She worked in the house. The maid. Clarice stepped forward. Gravel shifted under her heel with a dry crunch. She clutched something so tightly in her hand that her knuckles had gone white. For a heartbeat, the object stayed hidden in her fist. Then sunlight slipped through the tent seam and caught dark glass. A small vial, almost black. The light turning the liquid inside into a thin band of amber that painted a stripe across her bruising cheek like a brand. "You cannot bury him," Clarice said. "Not until someone checks him. Not until you listen." Reverend Howard's lips stopped moving. His eyes flicked to the attendants and back to Clarice, as if he could find safety in procedure. Behind him, the choir held still, mouths slightly open, as if the air had been stolen from them. At the center aisle, Marjorie Whittaker turned slowly. Pearl earrings flashed as she faced Clarice. Her black veil sat perfectly. Her posture was immaculate. Her expression was not grief. It was control. "You filthy little pest," Marjorie said, voice smooth enough to be polite and poisonous enough to burn. "You dare come here, to this sacred moment, and bark nonsense like a street woman." Clarice swallowed. Her throat was dry, raw, but she did not step back. "Mrs. Whittaker," she said, "I know how this sounds, but I swear on my mother's grave, your husband is not dead. He was drugged." A collective inhale rose from the crowd, then broke into murmurs. Phones came up as if pulled by the same instinct. Screens glowed. Camera lenses blinked awake. A young man in a navy blazer lifted his phone higher, framing Marjorie and Clarice in the same shot. A little red light appeared on his screen. Marjorie's gaze flicked to it. Just once, but it was enough. Her smile tightened. A crack showed in the porcelain. "You overheard something," Marjorie snapped, louder now. "You pathetic rodent. I let you serve in my house, and you repay me by crawling through walls like a rat." Clarice's fingers tightened around the vial until it bit into her skin. "I heard you and Dr. Levin," Clarice said. "Last night, in the library. You said it worked. You said he would be cold by morning." One attendant shifted his weight, eyes darting to Marjorie, then back to the casket lid. His hand stayed on the wood, waiting for an order. Marjorie stepped forward. Her heels struck the platform with hard, deliberate taps. She did not look like a widow in pain. She looked like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "You are just a maid," she said. "Nothing more. Your place is in the kitchen or beneath my boots. Not here. Not among people who matter." A flash went off from somewhere near the third row. Another followed. Marjorie's eyes narrowed at the bright bursts, at the fact that the moment belonged to cameras now. Clarice lifted the vial higher. The amber band of light slid across the glass again and across her face, highlighting the swelling on her cheek and the steadiness in her jaw. "This is the antidote," Clarice said. If I am wrong, nothing happens, but if I am right and you bury him. Marjorie moved fast. Her hand snapped across Clarice's face. The sound cracked through the tent like a whip. Clarice's head turned with the force. Heat exploded across her cheek. For a second, her mouth filled with the taste of metal. The world shrank to ringing in her ears and the sharp, sweet stink of lilies. The crowd went silent in shock, then surged with whispers. "Did you see that?" She hit her. Clarice blinked once and refocused. She tasted blood at the corner of her mouth. She did not drop the vial. Marjorie's breath came faster now, anger sharpened by exposure. She saw phones still lifted, still recording, and it made her reckless. "Get her out!" Marjorie barked, voice cracking the first time. "Grab her! She is trying to desecrate my husband. She is trying to poison him." A security guard near the aisle started forward. An attendant's hand tightened on the casket lid as if he might close it out of reflex. Marjorie shoved Clarice hard in the shoulder. Clarice staggered backward. Her shoes skidded on the burial carpet. The edge of the open grave yawned behind her, a dark rectangle of waiting earth. Gravel slipped under her heel again. The world tilted. For a brutal half-second, the drop pulled at her stomach, cold and hungry. Someone screamed. Clarice's arms flew out, searching for balance. The vial flashed in the air, amber light trembling through it. Her breath hitched as the grave rose up in her vision like a mouth. Then a hand clamped around her elbow. Firm, small, steady. Aunt Helen Whitaker stood at the end of the front row, lavender coat catching the gray light like a signal flare. Her fingers locked into Clarice's arm with a grip that did not ask permission. "I have you, baby," Helen whispered, and the words felt like a rope thrown to someone mid-fall. Clarice dragged air into her lungs and pulled herself upright. Her knees shook but held. Her cheek throbbed. Her heartbeat hammered in her throat. The difference between the two hands on her body was unmistakable. Marjorie's hand had been punishment. Helen's was rescue. Marjorie turned away in disgust, as if Clarice's survival offended her. "Should have let her fall," Marjorie muttered. But the phones heard it. The crowd heard it. The word fall landed in the air like an accusation. The guard hesitated. The attendant's hands loosened on the lid. Clarice steadied her stance, shoulders squaring as if she were putting on armor no one could tear off. She held the vial up again, higher, so the cameras could not pretend they missed it. "I was a nurse for 12 years, Clarice said, voice rough but clear. "Before I scrubbed your floors, I know what a dying body feels like, and what a living one feels like." A man in a gray suit rose halfway from his seat, jaw clenched. "This is outrageous," he said. "Dr. Levin pronounced him dead. There is a certificate." "Then bring him here," Clarice said. "Bring the doctor, and let me check the body before you seal that lid." Marjorie's eyes sharpened with panic she tried to disguise as fury. She looked at the phones again, at the glowing red record lights, at the way the crowd had shifted from mourning to witnessing. "Throw her out," Marjorie ordered, but her voice did not land the way it used to. Clarice took one step forward. No one moved to stop her. Not yet. Clarice moved before anyone could remember how to stop her. The gravel gave under her shoes, dry and sharp, and the burial carpet shifted in slow ripples as she crossed it. Behind her, the tent canvas snapped again, a nervous flutter above a roomful of held breath. The raised phones tracked her like spotlights, their screens bright in the gray morning. Marjorie's heels struck the platform twice, quick and furious. "Do not touch him," she hissed, the words aimed like nails. "You will not." Aunt Helen stepped out from the row with the quiet authority of someone who had once decided what happened in this family and never fully stopped. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. "If there's even the smallest chance," Helen said, looking not at Clarice but at the attendants, "then we try." One of the funeral attendants swallowed. His hands hovered over the lid, uncertain, torn between the widow's command and the hundreds of eyes filming him. The other attendant's gaze flicked to the phones, then to Marjorie, then away as if he had suddenly realized he was standing in a frame that could ruin him. Reverend Howard stepped back from the podium, palms open, retreating from the collision of power and truth. His collar looked too tight. His mouth worked, but no words came. Clarice reached the casket and put her palm flat on the wood. It was colder than she expected, a clean, polished chill that didn't belong to a human goodbye. the scent of varnish mixed with lilies and damp earth, making her stomach roll. "I need help lifting it," she said. Two men came forward, an usher with shaking hands and a member of the grave crew with a face set hard, as if he'd decided he was done watching people get pushed around for sport. They placed their fingers along the seam. Marjorie's voice sharpened into something desperate. "Security! Now! She's trying to poison him. She's trying to disgrace him." The security guard took a step, then stopped when he realized half the crowd had pivoted to film him too. A camera flash popped. The guard's jaw tightened. He held back, caught in the sudden truth that every move could be replayed in a courtroom and a comment section. Clarice's fingers found the small latch. The metal was cool. She lifted it. A soft click sounded louder than a shout. The lid shifted with a slow creak as the men raised it. Air spilled out stale, floral, and wrong, like a room that had been closed too long. The crowd leaned forward as one body, the tent filled with the quiet friction of fabric and breath. Richard Whittaker lay inside, dressed as if he'd been arranged for a photograph. His face was pale, lips slightly parted, lashes resting against his cheeks. He looked asleep in a way that made people believe what they were told. Clarice leaned in, close enough to see the faint texture of skin, the way his collar sat at his throat. Her own heartbeat hammered in her ears. She watched his chest. Still, she touched two fingers lightly at his neck, just below the jaw. Skin that was not the cold of death. Skin that held a stubborn warmth, thin but present, like a candle that refused to go out. Marjorie's breath hitched, audible now. "This is insane," she said, but the words came out brittle. Clarice did not look at her. She kept her eyes on Richard's mouth. The vial in her hand felt heavier than glass should. Dark glass, clear liquid, and a strip of amber light bleeding through it whenever the sun slipped past the tent seam. Clarice uncapped it. The tiny pop of the seal sounded obscene in the silence. Someone in the back started to pray under their breath. The choir shifted, hymn books trembling in their hands. A woman near the aisle made a small, strangled sound like she was trying not to cry. Clarice pulled out the dropper. The liquid clung to it, clear and steady. "One drop," she said, not to the crowd but to herself, anchoring the moment. Marjorie lurched forward a fraction, eyes wild. "Stop her," she demanded, and there was panic under the command now, a crack in the veneer. "Stop this." Aunt Helen's voice cut across without force, just certainty. "Let her." Clarice's hand hovered over Richard's lips. The muscles in her forearms shook with the effort of control. Her bruised cheek throbbed in time with her pulse, hot and insistent. She lowered the dropper. The drop fell. It landed on Richard's tongue with a soft, wet sound that seemed to echo in the tent. Time stretched. Clarice stared at his face. She searched for the smallest betrayal of stillness, an eyelid flutter, a throat twitch, a rise of the chest. She watched as if looking could force motion into existence. 1 second. 2. 3. Nothing. A murmur stirred through the crowd like a draft under a door. Someone whispered, "He's not moving." Another voice, sharper, almost relieved. "It's over." Clarice's jaw clenched. The part of her that wanted to collapse, that wanted to apologize and disappear, pressed hard against the part of her that had run here with a vial in her pocket and terror in her throat. She could feel the old instincts from long night shifts. Hold steady, reassess, do not panic in front of people who want you to. Her fingers tightened around the dropper. Marjorie's mouth curled. "See?" she said, too quickly, too bright. "You've done enough. You've embarrassed yourself." Clarice didn't lift her head. She kept her eyes fixed on Richard's lips. "One more," she said. Marjorie snapped. "No." Clarice raised the dropper again. Her hand trembled now, not with doubt, but with the weight of everyone watching her decide whether she was a fool or the only person in the tent who understood what was at stake. Aunt Helen stepped closer to the casket, her hands clasped tight at her chest, knuckles pale. When she spoke, her voice was lower but sharper than before. "You've said enough today," Helen told Marjorie. Clarice drew a breath that tasted like lilies and cold metal. She squeezed the dropper slowly, forcing a single drop to form. It hung there, heavy and perfect, catching light. It fell. For a beat, nothing moved, not the tent, not the mourners, not even Marjorie. The silence was so complete it felt like the world had stopped to listen. Then something shifted. A faint twitch at Richard's throat, so small it could have been imagined. Clarice froze, eyes widening, ears straining as if sound might arrive before motion. Her breath caught hard in her chest. There it was again. A flutter, like a trapped bird. Richard's lips moved a fraction. Then a cough broke from him, quiet but real, rough against the stillness like a match striking. The tent erupted. Gasps turned to cries. Phones dipped and surged. A woman stumbled backward, hand over her mouth. Someone started sobbing openly. Another voice shouted, "Oh my God!" Clarice leaned in, close enough to feel the warmth of his exhale. "It's okay," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Just breathe. Stay with me." Richard coughed again, stronger. His eyelids fluttered as if fighting through heavy water. His eyes cracked open, unfocused, confused, searching for the shape of the world he'd been told was over. Clarice's hands moved automatically, careful, controlled. She supported the side of his head with folded lining, keeping him from slumping. Richard's mouth trembled. His voice came out hoarse and broken, scraped raw. "Clarice." The name fell into the tent like a stone into deep water. Marjorie's face drained of color so fast it was almost frightening. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The rage that had driven her moments ago collapsed into something else, pure, naked horror, like a person watching the truth crawl out of a grave. The crowd surged closer. Some people crossed themselves. Others cried out that it was a miracle. The cameras kept rolling, unblinking, hungry. Clarice straightened just enough to put her body between Richard and the air around him, between his fragile breathing and the woman who had tried to make the world believe he had none. Marjorie took one step back, as if the casket had become a doorway and something had just walked through it. Sirens began to rise in the distance, thin at first, then growing louder, red and blue light flickering beyond the iron gates like an approaching storm. The sirens reached the gates like a tearing sound, growing from distant wails into something that vibrated in Clarice's ribs. Red and blue light strobed across the cemetery grass, catching on polished shoes, on wet eyes, on the silver casket handles. Richard tried to lift his head again. The effort pulled a thin groan from his throat. His skin shone with sweat that did not belong to the morning air. "Easy," Clarice said, keeping her voice low. Her hands stayed firm on the lining under his neck. The velvet felt damp where his breath had warmed it. "Don't fight it. Just breathe." Aunt Helen pressed closer, her fingers trembling as they hovered over Richard's hand, as if she was afraid that touching him too hard would make him vanish. She finally grasped his fingers and exhaled a sound that was half sob, half prayer. "My boy," she whispered. "Oh God, you're here." "Rides, Dat." Behind them, the crowd broke into two instincts at once: surge forward and get out of the way. Bodies shifted, fabric brushed. Someone's phone clattered to the ground and kept recording upside down, the screen flashing a crooked view of shoes and grass. Marjorie stood a few steps back from the open casket. Her posture had not changed, but everything inside it had. Her face looked carved from wax that had started to melt. He was supposed to be gone," she said under her breath, the words barely shaped. Clarice heard it anyway. She rose slowly, keeping her shoulder angled so she could block Richard from Marjorie's line if she lunged. The bruise on her cheek pulsed with heat, but the pain had turned useful. It reminded her exactly why she could not soften now. "You tried to bury him alive," Clarice said. Her voice didn't shake. "That's what's impossible. Die last of the doors, ways." Marjorie's eyes snapped to her, sharp with a last attempt at control. "You don't know what you're talking about." Clarice's gaze stayed steady, the way it had stayed steady in hospital rooms when families begged for miracles she couldn't manufacture. "I heard you," she said. "In the library, you and Dr. Levin. You talked about dosage like it was scheduling." A murmur rippled outward. Heads turned. A reporter squeezed closer, notebook raised. Someone near the back called, loud enough to be heard over the sirens. "Is that true? Where's the doctor?" Clarice's eyes scanned instinctively, following the direction of people turning their phones like searchlights. Near a refreshment table under a smaller canopy, a man in a dark coat stood too still. Dr. Levin. He had positioned himself where he could disappear. But a crowd is a net when it wants to be, and now every face pivoted toward him at once. His shoulders hunched as if the attention had weight. "This is ridiculous," Levin said, voice too high. "She's lying." Clarice didn't move, but something in her stomach tightened. The line was familiar, the reflex of authority when it thinks it can still crush a witness with tone alone. Before she could speak again, Richard rasped from the casket. "No." The single syllable cut through the noise like a blade. Levin froze. Richard swallowed, throat working. His voice was weak but unmistakable. "She's telling the truth." Gasps hit the tent like a wind. Marjorie's hand flew to the edge of a pew as if the ground had shifted under her. Richard's eyelids fluttered, and he focused on Clarice with a painful slowness. His face tightened, not from the effort of speaking, but from what the speaking meant. "I heard them," he said, the words scraping out. "That night, I wasn't fully unconscious. They thought I couldn't hear, halved as red." Marjorie stepped forward one pace, panic flaring into anger. "Stop it," she hissed. "Stop talking. You don't know what you're saying." Richard's chest lifted, then shuddered. He pulled another breath like someone hauling air through water. "I know exactly what I'm saying," he forced out. "You tried to kill me." Clarice felt the crowd tilt. Phones rose higher. The cameras smelled blood now, not in a literal way, but in the way people do when a secret finally breaks. Marjorie's lips moved without sound, as if she was trying to rewrite the moment before it finished happening. 2 squad cars rolled up close. Doors opened hard. Boots hit gravel. The first officer to enter the tent was a tall woman with a rigid posture and a face that didn't flinch at chaos. Her eyes took in the open grave, the lifted casket lid, the living man inside it, and the woman standing in front like a shield. "What the hell happened here?" she demanded. Clarice turned her head slightly. The movement made the bruise on her cheek sting again, sharp and bright. She welcomed it. It kept her honest. "I believe there's been an attempted murder," Clarice said, "and I'd like to give my statement." The officer's gaze flicked to the mark on Clarice's face, then to Marjorie, then back to Richard, who coughed again, wet and ragged. The officer lifted her radio. "We need medical on scene, now, and detectives. Possible homicide." Static crackled back. More sirens answered from farther out. Paramedics pushed in with a stretcher, their uniforms bright against the sea of black. They moved with practiced speed, snapping gloves on, pulling an oxygen mask from plastic. The smell of antiseptic cut through lilies and dirt, clean and clinical, almost comforting. Clarice stepped aside just enough to let them reach Richard, but not enough to give Marjorie a clear path. She watched the paramedic tilt Richard's chin gently, place the mask over his mouth, and call out numbers to a partner. Richard's eyes stayed open, tracking Clarice as if she was the only anchor in the tent. His hand lifted weakly from the lining, fingers searching. Clarice caught his hand once, brief and careful. His grip was barely there, but it was real. Aunt Helen stood close, tears streaking along the lines of her face. She pressed her mouth to Richard's forehead, a kiss that looked like relief made physical. Marjorie shifted backward as the stretcher came in. She angled her body toward the exit, calculating. Clarice saw it in the quick dart of her eyes, the way she measured distance and attention. Marjorie tried to slip away, but the crowd had changed. They no longer parted for her. They closed in without touching, a wall of bodies and phones and judgment. A man in the second row stepped sideways, blocking her path. A woman with a camera lifted it higher, forcing Marjorie's face into the frame. For once, no one moved to shield her. The tall officer stepped directly into Marjorie's line. "Ma'am," she said, voice flat, "you're going to stay right here." Marjorie's nostrils flared. "I'm his wife," she snapped. "You can't." The officer cut her off. "You're a suspect. Sit down." "Is a fanned." Marjorie's head turned sharply toward Clarice, hatred stripped of polish. "This is your fault," she spat. "You should have known your place." Clarice held her gaze without blinking. "My place," Clarice said, voice low and clear, "is wherever the truth needs to be spoken." Levin stood near the refreshment table, face slick with sweat. He wouldn't meet Clarice's eyes. His hands kept flexing as if he couldn't decide what to do with them. "You swore an oath," Clarice said. "Not loud, not kind, not cruel, just factual. To do no harm." Levin flinched, as if the words had weight. He started, then stopped when one of the officers looked his way. The paramedics lifted Richard carefully, straps clicking into place. The stretcher wheels squeaked as they rolled him toward the ambulance. Oxygen hissed softly with each breath, a steady sound that calmed the violent edge of the morning. Clarice followed a few steps behind until an officer held up a hand. "Ma'am," the officer said, eyes on Clarice's bruise, "I need you over here." Clarice turned, the gravel crunching under her shoes. Her hands were still shaking, but her spine stayed straight. A detective pushed through Karen Morales, her badge catching the strobe of the squad car lights. Her expression tightened when she saw Clarice's face. "Start from the beginning," Morales said, flipping open a notebook. "And take your time." Clarice inhaled slowly, tasting lilies, smoke from distant exhaust, and the clean bite of antiseptic. Across the tent, Marjorie fought against two officers guiding her toward a seat, her perfect dress wrinkling at the waist where hands held her in place. Richard disappeared into the ambulance, doors shutting with a hollow thud that sounded like a chapter closing. Clarice kept her eyes on Morales. "I'll tell you everything," she said. The ambulance pulled away with a low groan of tires on gravel, its lights smearing red and blue across the wet grass. Clarice watched the back doors until they disappeared beyond the iron gates, the oxygen hiss and urgent voices swallowed by distance. Detective Karen Morales led her toward a folding table set up under the edge of the tent, away from the crush of phones and mouths. The table wobbled slightly on uneven ground. A portable printer sat beside a clear evidence kit, its plastic trays catching the strobing patrol lights. Morales opened her notebook, pen poised. Full name: Clarice May Bennett. The pen moved. Address. Clarice gave it. Her tongue felt dry around the words. The bruise on her cheek pulsed each time she spoke. Morales's eyes flicked to the swelling. Did Mrs. Whitaker do that? Clarice's instinct rose fast and old, the familiar urge to soften pain into nothing. Then she saw the open grave in her mind, the edge of it, the way the ground had weighted. "Yes," Clarice said. "She did." Morales's pen pressed harder into the paper. "All right, start from the beginning." Clarice looked down at her hands. They were still shaking, not violently, but in a fine tremor that told the truth about adrenaline after it has nowhere to go. "I worked at the estate," she said, keeping her sentences short so her breath would stay steady. 6 years. I managed household events, cleaned, cooked, staff schedules. "Any medical training?" Morales asked, eyes sharp. Clarice swallowed. "I was a nurse, 12 years. Morales's pen paused, just for a beat. "Where?" Clarice named the hospital. She could still smell it in her mind, antiseptic and stale coffee, latex gloves snapped on in a hurry. Morales nodded once, as if the answer locked something into place. "Now tell me about last night." Clarice's gaze slid to the tent pole beside them, wrapped in white fabric, fluttering softly. She grounded herself in small details the way she used to at the bedside. Focus on one object, then speak. "I was cleaning the East Wing," she said. "The library. I heard voices. Mrs. Whitaker and Dr. Levin." Morales's pen moved faster. "What did you hear?" Clarice's jaw tightened. She remembered the calmness of it, the casual tone, like discussing dinner reservations. "They argued about timing," Clarice said. "Dosage, making it look natural. A suppressant, something that slows the heart to nearly nothing." Morales looked up. "You know that for sure?" Clarice met her eyes. "I know what a faint pulse feels like. And I know what warm skin means." Morales held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded. "Okay." A uniformed officer approached, carrying a clear plastic bag with a dark vial inside. The vial clicked against the evidence tag as he set it down. "Recovered from Miss Bennett," the officer said. Morales pulled on gloves with a crisp snap. "Time?" The officer glanced at his watch. 10:42. Morales wrote it down, then wrote again on a small label. She slid the vial into a sealed evidence bag, pressed the adhesive strip firmly, and signed across the seal with a thick black marker. The marker squeaked on plastic. She stamped the label. The stamp thudded once, blunt and official. Clarice watched the process, the chain made visible. Hands, time, place, seal. It steadied her more than comfort ever could. Across the cemetery, raised voices surged again. Marjorie Whittaker was being guided toward a squad car, her black dress now wrinkled at the waist where officers held her. Her face was pale with fury. She kept looking back over her shoulder, searching for someone to rescue her, lawyer, friend, anyone. No one moved. Doctor. Levin stood near a cruiser, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the ground. When he lifted his head, his gaze slid past Clarice, as if eye contact might make the moment real. Morales followed Clarice's line of sight and made a quick note. We'll speak to him next. Clarice's mouth tasted like metal again, not from blood this time, but from the memory of Marjorie's voice, confident, cold. She rubbed her thumb against the side of her index finger, a small motion that used to calm her during long shifts. Morales closed her notebook halfway. You're coming with us to the station. Formal statement on record. Clarice nodded. Yes. They guided her through the crowd. Cameras flashed. A microphone appeared in her path. Someone called her name, already knowing it. Miss Bennett, did you save him? Were you afraid? Is it true she tried to bury him alive? The noise hit her like heat. Clarice's breath caught, but she kept moving, eyes forward. The patrol car door opened with a hollow clunk. Vinyl seats smelled of disinfectant and sun-baked plastic. At the precinct, the interview room was small and cold. Gray walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, a camera in the corner with a tiny red light. The air tasted faintly of old coffee and copier toner. Morales sat across from her. Another detective stood at the side, older, silent, holding a paper cup he never drank. Morales slid a form forward. Read and sign. Clarice's fingers hovered for a second, then took the pen. The plastic pen was cheap and light, but it scratched her name into the page with finality. The camera hummed softly. Morales tapped the top of the page. For the record, why were you at the cemetery? Clarice stared at the blank corner of the table, then lifted her eyes. Because the funeral was moved up, she said. Because I was fired that morning. Because I knew they were rushing to bury him before anyone asked questions. Morales leaned in slightly. Who is they? Clarice felt her heartbeat settle into a slow, hard rhythm. Mrs. Whittaker, she said. And Dr. Levin. The older detective's eyes narrowed a fraction. Morales's voice stayed even. You understand what you're alleging. Clarice's bruise throbbed as if answering for her. I understand, she said. Outside the interview room, a muffled swell of voices rose from the lobby. Reporters, more phones. The story was already running ahead of them. Morales glanced toward the door, then back at Clarice. One more thing, she said quietly. The media knows your name now. They're outside. Well, end quote. Clarice's stomach tightened, not with fear of being seen, but with the sudden knowledge that being seen could be used as a weapon. Morales lowered her voice further. Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight? Clarice opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. The only honest answer felt like a cliff. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, one vibration, sharp and insistent. Unknown number. Clarice stared at the fabric of her apron, still wrinkled at the waist, still smelling faintly of lilies and smoke. Morales watched her hand hover near the phone. Clarice didn't pick it up yet. Clarice let the phone vibrate itself into silence. The interview room felt smaller once the sound stopped, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. The camera's red light stayed steady in the corner, watching without blinking. Morales's pen hovered over her notebook. You're done for now, Morales said. We'll take you home. But you don't walk out that front door alone. Clarice nodded, throat tight. The bruise on her cheek had darkened into a dull heat. She could still feel the edge of the grave under her heel. The moment balance almost left her for good. When Morales opened the door, noise hit Clarice like a shove. Reporters crowded the precinct entrance, phones raised, microphones thrust forward. Camera shutters snapped in quick bursts, dry and hungry. Someone called her name again, louder, like they were entitled to it. Clarice kept her eyes down and followed Morales through a side hallway. A metal door buzzed, then clicked. The sound felt clean, procedural, safe. Outside, the afternoon air was colder than it looked. Exhaust and wet pavement mixed with the faint sweetness of a florist shop down the block. Morales guided Clarice to an unmarked car. The seatbelt slid over Clarice's shoulder with a soft rasp. The car pulled away. No sirens this time, just movement. Street Matthews Hospital rose ahead, pale stone and glass under a dull sky. The entrance doors breathed open and shut, swallowing people in waves. Inside, the smell of antiseptic hit immediately, sharp enough to erase lilies and smoke from Clarice's nose for a moment. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Morales walked Clarice past the front desk, her badge earning quick glances and fast compliance. A nurse in scrubs pointed them toward a waiting area near the ICU. Clarice stopped at the threshold. The familiar sounds found her before her eyes did. The soft beep of monitors, the distant squeak of cartwheels, the muted urgency in voices trained not to panic. Her hands flexed once at her sides, a muscle memory from another life. 12 years of holding steady while other people fell apart. A doctor stepped out, white coat creased at the elbows, tired eyes behind clear lenses. He held a clipboard with clipped papers. "Miss Bennett," he said. "He's stable, weak, but improving." Clarice's breath left her in a long exhale she hadn't realized she was holding. "If you hadn't intervened," the doctor added, then stopped as if the rest of the sentence felt too ugly to say out loud. Clarice nodded. "Can I see him?" The doctor hesitated, then tilted his head toward the hall. A minute. The room was dimmer than the corridor, blinds half closed against the late light. Machines hummed softly. Richard Whittaker lay pale against white sheets, oxygen tubing looped under his nose. His hands looked too still on the blanket, as if the world had to relearn how to animate him. Clarice stepped in quietly. The door clicked shut behind her. Richard's eyes opened slowly, tracking the movement in the room. Recognition took time, like fog lifting. Then it arrived all at once. "You came back!" he rasped, voice thin and raw. Clarice stopped beside the bed. She kept her hands visible, calm, as if approaching a frightened animal. "I told you I would," she said. Richard's gaze drifted to her cheek. The bruise looked darker under hospital light, an ugly bloom along her jaw. "She hurt you," he said, frowning, the effort making his brow crease. "It doesn't matter," Clarice said, but her fingers tightened briefly around the strap of her bag. "You're alive. I'm ready today." Richard swallowed, his throat working like the words were heavy. "You stood there," he said, breath catching, "when everyone wanted you gone." Clarice didn't answer right away. The monitors beeped in a steady rhythm beside him, a small, stubborn proof of continuation. She watched the rise of his chest, the fall, the quiet persistence. "Someone had to," she said. Richard's hand shifted under the blanket, searching. Clarice hesitated for a fraction of a second, then placed her hand near his. He covered her fingers weakly. The warmth was faint, but real. A soft knock came at the door. Morales stepped in, posture less rigid now, but eyes still sharp. She glanced at Richard, then back to Clarice. "We need your formal statement on video," Morales said. "Written too. Tonight or first thing in the morning." Clarice nodded without taking her hand away. "I understand." Morales lowered her voice. "Also, the media is outside the hospital." Clarice's jaw tightened. The thought of cameras finding her here, near these machines and this fragile body, made something protective harden in her chest. "I don't want to talk," Clarice said. "You don't have to," Morales replied. "But they're not going to stop asking." Richard turned his head slightly toward Morales, eyes narrowing with a quiet anger that looked new on him. "She shouldn't have to face them," he said. "Not after what she's been through." Morales studied him. "This isn't just about her anymore," she said. "It's about what was done to you, and who did it." Morales left them with that, the door clicking softly behind her. Silence settled back into the room, heavier now. Richard stared at the ceiling tiles as if he could read answers in their seams. After a long moment, his voice came out low. "Why didn't you walk away?" he asked. "After she hit you. After she tried to—" Clarice looked down at their hands. A faint tremor had started in her fingers now that the danger had passed, the kind that comes when the body finally understands it survived. "Because, if I fell," she said slowly, choosing each word like a step on unstable ground, "she would have buried you anyway." Richard's throat worked again. His grip tightened a fraction, then loosened with fatigue. Clarice's eyes shifted to the window, where the city moved below in tiny, indifferent lines of traffic. She could see the reflection of herself in the glass apron, wrinkled, face marked, shoulders squared. "I've been invisible most of my life," she said, voice quieter, pulled inward despite herself. "When you're invisible, people think you won't speak. They get careless." Richard turned his head toward her. His eyes looked clearer now, focused. "Marjorie was careless," he said. Clarice nodded once. "And so was the doctor." Richard's mouth tightened. Anger flickered, then settled into something colder. "They thought no one like you mattered enough to be dangerous," he said. Clarice met his gaze. They were wrong. A nurse stepped in briefly to check Richard's monitor leads, her gloved fingers moving quickly. The latex snapped softly against her wrist when she adjusted the tubing. She gave Clarice a look that was half curiosity, half respect, then left again. The door shut. The machines hummed. Richard's voice came again, rough but steady. "Thank you," he said. Clarice didn't smile. Not yet. Gratitude felt too small for what this had become. She watched the way his chest rose, the way his fingers slackened with exhaustion, the way survival looked like work. The hardest part, Clarice realized, wasn't stopping a funeral. It was what came after, when truth refused to lie down again. Outside the room, footsteps approached. Voices murmured. A distant camera shutter clicked somewhere down the hall. Clarice sat upright, shoulders squaring, already bracing for the next question, the next push, the next attempt to make her shrink. Richard's eyes stayed on her. "Stay," he said, barely more than a breath. Clarice held his gaze for one steady beat, then nodded. "All right," she said. Morning light slid through the hospital blinds in thin gray stripes, turning the room into a quiet grid of shadow and glow. Clarice sat in the plastic chair beside Richard's bed with her coat folded on her lap. The coffee in her paper cup had gone cold, bitter, and metallic on her tongue when she tried to drink it anyway. Richard slept in uneven waves, his breathing supported by tubing and quiet machines that hummed like distant insects. Every so often his brow tightened, as if his body still argued with the idea of being alive. A knock came at the door, gentle but firm. Detective Morales stepped in without her notebook this time. Her posture looked less rigid, but her eyes were the same, sharp and unsentimental. "Miss Bennett," Morales said, keeping her voice low, "we need the statement today. Video and written. On record." Clarice set the cup down carefully so it wouldn't rattle. The small sound still felt too loud in the room. "I understand," she said. Morales's gaze flicked to Richard, then back to Clarice. "Media is downstairs. They're waiting. If you go out the main entrance, they'll swarm you." Clarice felt her stomach tighten. She could already hear it in her mind, the layered noise of people demanding a story they could own. "I don't want to talk," she said. "You don't have to," Morales replied. "But they'll try to make you anyway." Richard stirred, eyes half opening. His voice was rough with sleep and pain. "She shouldn't have to deal with them." Morales held his gaze for a beat. "This isn't about comfort anymore," she said quietly. "It's about record." Clarice stood, her knees complained, stiff from hours in the chair. She smoothed the crease of her apron automatically, then stopped, realizing she still wore it like a habit she hadn't learned to break. Morales nodded toward the door. "We'll take the back way." They moved through service corridors that smelled of bleach and cafeteria steam, past carts stacked with linen and gloves. Elevator doors opened with a soft ding, then closed, sealing them in a box of fluorescent light. Clarice watched her reflection in the steel wall. The bruise on her cheek had deepened into purple and yellow at the edges, like ink spreading under skin. At the precinct, the interview room was colder than she remembered. The air carried old coffee and copier toner. A camera sat in the corner, its tiny red light already on. The table was bare except for a folder and a bottle of water with condensation sliding down the plastic. Morales set the folder down and flipped it open. Paper whispered. A pen clicked. "State your full name for the record," Morales said. Clarice looked at the camera. The lens felt like another set of eyes, unblinking, impatient. "Clarice May Bennett," she said. "Occupation," Morales said. Clarice paused. The word maid pressed against her teeth like something that had been used as a weapon. "Domestic worker," she said, then corrected herself, the truth tasting sharper. "Former nurse." Morales's pen moved. "Begin." Clarice told it clean. Not dramatic. Not pleading. She described the voices in the library, the words about timing and dosage, the way certain people spoke when they thought no one like her counted as a person. She described the funeral rush and the dismissal, the feeling of a clock being shoved forward. When Morales asked about the assault, Clarice's throat tightened. "She struck me," Clarice said, "then shoved me toward the grave." "Witnesses?" Morales asked. "Yes," Clarice said. "Many." Morales nodded once, as if satisfied by the simplicity of it. "There always are," she said, almost to herself. A uniformed officer entered with an evidence bag. Inside, Clarice's dark vial sat sealed and tagged, the plastic crinkling faintly as he set it on the table. Morales pulled on gloves, wrote a time, signed across the seal again, and pressed a stamp down with a dull thud. The sound landed in Clarice's bones like a door closing. When the statement ended, Morales slid the written transcript toward Clarice. Clarice signed. The pen scratched. Her name looked too calm for the way her heart still thumped. Outside, sunlight hit harder than expected, bright enough to make Clarice squint. The front sidewalk was crowded. Cameras, microphones, people calling her name like they owned it. "Miss Bennett, did you really save him? Are you afraid of retaliation?" Clarice froze for half a second, the noise swallowing her. She felt the old instinct rise again, the one that said, "Keep your head down, stay quiet, do not give anyone a reason." Then she remembered the grave. She lifted her chin and kept walking. Morales didn't let anyone get close enough to touch her. A uniformed officer held the crowd back with an open palm. Flashbulbs popped, bright white bursts. Clarice's ears rang. They got her into a car and drove her across town. The streets looked unchanged, people buying coffee and carrying grocery bags, as if the world hadn't almost swallowed a living man. Clarice watched the city pass through glass and tried to feel normal again. It didn't arrive. Her apartment building looked smaller than she remembered. Brick worn at the edges, mailboxes dented. On the front steps, a neighbor stood with a bag of trash, staring like Clarice had become a headline with legs. "Morning," Clarice said, voice polite. The neighbor blinked and nodded, eyes sliding to the bruise and away. Inside, her living room smelled faintly of old cooking oil and laundry soap. The hum of her refrigerator filled the silence. The couch cushion had a worn dip where she always sat. For a moment, the room felt like someone else's life, a life that belonged to a woman who stayed invisible on purpose. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Clarice stared at it until it stopped. It rang again immediately. She answered without saying hello. "Miss Bennett?" a man's voice asked, bright and polished. "This is Daniel Reed from Channel 7 News. We'd like to invite you to speak on our evening segment. Your story could inspire millions." Clarice closed her eyes. She could picture the studio lights, the careful questions designed to turn her into a symbol, a bite-sized hero people could applaud and then forget. "This isn't about that," Clarice said quietly. "We can control the narrative," Daniel Reed said quickly. "We can make sure people know what you did." Clarice's fingers tightened around the phone. The plastic creaked faintly. "I didn't do it to be known," she said. A pause. Then his voice softened, practiced empathy. "People need hope right now." Clarice looked at her kitchen table, at the stack of unopened mail, at the small, cheap clock that kept ticking like nothing had changed. "Goodbye," she said. She ended the call and sat down slowly on the couch. The fabric sighed under her weight. Her hands rested in her lap, still, while her mind ran. Outside, a car door slammed. Someone laughed. Life continued. Clarice stared at the blank television screen across the room, her reflection faint in the dark glass. She could see her bruise, her apron, her posture that refused to fold. The phone vibrated again. No caller ID, just insistence. Clarice didn't answer. Not yet. The call came again at dusk, after the light in Clarice's apartment had thinned into a tired gold, and the refrigerator's hum had started to feel like a heartbeat. She answered on the third ring, not because she wanted to, but because uncertainty was a kind of leash. "Miss Bennett?" a woman's voice asked. Older, steady, the kind of calm that didn't perform. Clarice stood, pacing one slow line between her couch and the window. "Who is this?" "Detective Morales gave me your number," the woman said. "My name is Pamela Dorsey, Department of Justice." Clarice stopped. The word justice hit differently than news. It didn't glitter, it weighed. Dorsey continued. We'd like to request your assistance in an investigation involving the Whitaker Foundation. Clarice's throat tightened. She could smell her own apartment soap, old wood, something fried from a neighbor's kitchen, small, ordinary scents that suddenly felt fragile. What kind of investigation? Clarice asked. Financial misconduct, Dorsey said. Nonprofit funds used to influence zoning contracts and judicial donations. Clarice sat slowly on the edge of her couch. The cushion dipped like it was bracing with her. Judicial donations, Clarice repeated, tasting the phrase like something bitter. Yes, Dorsey said. We believe charitable fronts were used to channel money into political campaigns. 2 judges, a zoning commissioner, possibly more. Clarice looked down at her hands. They were steady now, but she could feel a tremor waiting under the skin, the body's memory of fear. Why are you calling me? Clarice asked. Because you had access, Dorsey said. And because you noticed what others didn't. You cracked it open. Clarice's eyes moved to the window. Across the street, a teenager leaned against a fence, scrolling on his phone, oblivious to the way power moved behind closed doors. What do you need? Clarice asked, voice lower. A meeting, Dorsey said. Off record. Confidential. Tomorrow morning. Clarice swallowed. Is Richard aware? Not yet, Dorsey replied. We suspect he didn't know the full extent. Clarice's jaw clenched. The idea of telling Richard, of watching another layer of betrayal land on a man still learning how to breathe again, made her stomach twist. I'll be there, Clarice said. After the call ended, her apartment felt too quiet. The walls held her breath and didn't give it back. She stared at the phone until the screen went dark. Then she picked it up again and called Morales. The line clicked. Morales answered on the second ring, voice clipped. Bennett. Clarice kept her voice flat. DOJ called me. Pamela Dorsey. Morales went silent for a beat, then exhaled. That was fast. They want a private meeting, Clarice said. Morales' voice hardened slightly. Do not go alone. I won't, Clarice replied, though she hadn't said that out loud to herself yet. That night, Clarice didn't sleep. She sat on her couch with the lights off, the street lamp outside painting a pale rectangle across her living room carpet. Every time a car passed, headlights slid across her walls like searching eyes. In the early morning, she arrived at a small cafe on the edge of downtown, the kind of place where people spoke softly and didn't ask questions. Rain misted the windows, turning the city into blurred streaks of gray. The smell of burnt coffee and warm bread hung in the air. Clarice chose a booth in the back, away from the door. Her fingers wrapped around a mug for warmth, even though she didn't drink. At exactly 9, the door opened, and Pamela Dorsey walked in. Late 50s, tall, composed, dark trench coat, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She scanned the room once, quickly, like a person trained to read exits and threats. Then she slid into the booth across from Clarice. No one followed you, Dorsey said. Clarice's eyes flicked to the window, then back. No. Dorsey set the portfolio down. The leather made a soft thud on the table. We're building a larger case, she said. Not just theft. Influence, bribery, protected outcomes. Clarice leaned back slightly. The vinyl seat squeaked under her weight. I was a maid, Clarice said. I wasn't in board meetings. Dorsey didn't blink. But you were there. You saw who came and went. You knew what files were destroyed. You overheard conversations when people thought you didn't matter. Clarice's grip tightened on the mug. The heat pressed into her palms, grounding her. We need a credible witness, Dorsey said. Someone who can testify to patterns, to internal processes, to what was said behind closed doors. Clarice's mouth went dry. You want me to testify? Yes, Dorsey said. And we can offer federal protection, relocation if necessary. Clarice stared into her coffee. Steam curled upward, thin and restless, like the questions in her mind. Protection sounded like a promise. Relocation sounded like exile. And if I say no? Clarice asked. Dorsey's expression didn't change. Then the case slows down. People keep their power. This turns into rumor. The waitress came by and refilled the coffee without asking. The pot made a soft glug-glug as it poured. Clarice didn't touch it. Clarice's voice came out quiet. How long do I have? Everyone fived out half the dude. Dorsey leaned in a fraction. Not long. Indictments could begin within weeks. Clarice sat back, shoulders stiff. She could feel the pull between survival and responsibility like a rope cutting into skin. She imagined walking away, going back to scrubbing floors, letting the story fade, letting powerful people keep the machine running. Then she remembered the open grave, the way the ground had waited, the way silence nearly became death. I'll think about it, Clarice said. Dorsey nodded once, as if she expected that answer. Be careful, she said, and the words carried more weight than a warning. They carried knowledge. Clarice left the cafe with rain dampening her coat and a cold settling under her ribs. She drove back toward the Whitaker estate without fully deciding. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel anyway. The iron gates opened slowly, as if the property itself was reluctant to let the world in. The driveway curved under bare winter branches. The mansion rose ahead, white pillars, clean windows, perfect lawn. Beautiful, immaculate, and now unmistakably tainted. Clarice stepped out of her car and stood by the fountain. The sound of water felt too calm. A town car rolled up the driveway, escorted by a plain vehicle behind it. When it stopped, Richard Whitaker stepped out. He moved slowly but upright, leaning on nothing, face thinner than before, dark circles beneath his eyes. Two plainclothes officers lingered near the car. A nurse hovered at the edge, watchful. Richard looked at the house like he was seeing it for the first time. Clarice walked toward him. Her shoes clicked softly on stone. You ready? She asked. Richard's gaze stayed on the mansion. I have to be. Inside, staff gathered in the foyer. Housekeepers, gardeners, kitchen workers. Faces Clarice recognized. Some looked relieved. Some looked guilty. Some looked scared. The antique clock above the fireplace ticked loudly, each click like a small accusation. The butler, Mr. Hensley, stepped forward, hands clasped too tightly. Sir, he began, voice trembling. We thought. Richard cut him off, voice flat. Yes, I've heard. A nervous laugh sputtered from somewhere in the back and died immediately. Richard's eyes swept the room. Some of you did your jobs, he said. You told the truth. His gaze stopped on a woman near the staircase. Miranda, Marjorie's assistant, arms crossed, chin lifted in defiance. Miranda's eyes flicked to Clarice with open contempt. We followed orders, she said. It wasn't our place to question her. Clarice stepped forward half a pace. It's always your place, she said, when someone's life is on the line. Miranda's mouth curled. Oh, please. You're a maid, not a martyr. Richard turned his head slowly toward Miranda. His voice came out low and cold. That maid saved my life, he said, and she outranks you now. A ripple moved through the foyer. Shock, relief, fear. The power shift landed without a speech. It landed in the way people's posture changed when they realized the old rules were gone. Richard looked at Clarice then, eyes steady. I want a full audit, he said. Payroll, foundation accounts, everything. Clarice blinked once. The word audit felt like a door opening into darkness. You're putting me in charge, she said. Richard's expression didn't soften. You're the only one I trust to tell the truth, he said, even when it's hard. Clarice felt the weight settle on her shoulders, heavy and exact. She thought of Dorsey's words, be careful. She thought of the machine behind this house, humming quietly, still alive. Clarice nodded once. Then we start today, she said. And in the foyer, under the ticking clock and the watchful eyes of a house that had swallowed secrets for years, the first real reckoning began. The home office smelled like old leather and lemon polish, the kind of clean that tried too hard. Clarice stood in the doorway for a beat, taking in the heavy desk, the framed charity photos, the glass front cabinets that looked elegant until you noticed how many folders were missing. Kevin, the young tech assistant, sat at the side table with a laptop open. The screen glow lit his face in a pale blue wash. A faint server hum drifted from a small network closet down the hall. Clarice set a cardboard file box on the desk. The bottom thumped against wood. Start with the donation ledger, she said. Kevin nodded, fingers already moving. Keys clicked in quick bursts. Most of it's locked behind admin access, he said. But I can pull metadata from archived attachments. Well, Richard entered behind her, slower than he wanted to be. He held himself upright anyway, stubborn. The collar of his coat sat slightly loose on his thinner neck. His eyes landed on the file box like it was a live thing. "Anything yet?" he asked. Clarice slid on a pair of nitrile gloves. The latex snapped at her wrist, crisp and clinical. "Not yet," she said, but the house kept secrets in paper before it kept them in passwords. She opened the first drawer. It squealed softly. Inside were neat stacks of invoices, grant agreements, and board minutes too neat. Clarice pulled one folder free and smelled the paper as she flipped it open. Fresh toner. Recent reprints pretending to be old. Kevin made a small sound. "Found something," he said. Clarice walked over. On Kevin's screen, an email chain showed a PDF attachment labeled Community Literacy Initiative Grant. The creation date glared from the metadata panel. "Created 3 days ago," Kevin said. "But it's dated 15 years back." Clarice's stomach tightened. She pointed to the timestamp. "Screenshot it," she said. Kevin hit a key combination. The laptop made a soft shutter click. He saved the file with a timestamp name. Another click. Another capture. Evidence built in small, dull sounds. Richard leaned closer, breathing slightly heavier. "That fund was real," he said. "Aunt Helen helped start it." Clarice didn't look up yet. Her focus narrowed to the numbers in the PDF. "Look at the routing," she said. "The account trail doesn't match the grant language." Kevin scrolled. The cursor moved like a blade over the page. "These payments go to a consulting firm," he said. "And that firm pays a holding company in Barbados." Clarice's jaw set. "Print it," she said. Kevin hesitated. "Printer's in the hallway." "Then we walk it there," Clarice replied. "In daylight." They moved into the corridor where a small office printer sat on a rolling cart. The machine whirred to life, warming up with a rising mechanical purr. Paper fed through with a rhythmic clack. Each page landed in the output tray with a dry slap. Clarice watched the first sheet slide out. Bank transfer details, dates, and an authorization signature block. A signature that wasn't Richard's. Richard's face went still. "That's not mine," he said, voice flat. Clarice lifted the paper carefully, fingers pinching the corner like it might stain. She held it to the light. The ink looked too uniform. The curve of the R felt wrong, like someone copying from memory. Kevin spoke quietly. "Digital signature imprint," he said. "It's been applied to multiple documents. Same hash pattern, same tool." Clarice collected the pages into a neat stack, then slid them into a clear evidence sleeve Morales had left behind. Plastic crinkled. Clarice pressed the seal shut and wrote across it with a black marker. Her handwriting came out steady. Richard watched her hands. "How many?" he asked. Clarice opened another folder. Another. The deeper she went, the worse the pattern became. Donations that never reached clinics. Board approvals that didn't exist. Expense lines that read like charity and smelled like luxury. A champagne invoice disguised as fundraising hospitality. A private jet bill filed under outreach travel. A string of transfers labeled education supplies that went to shell nonprofits with no physical address. Clarice's eyes burned, not from tears but from fury. "She didn't just take money," Clarice said. "She bought silence." Kevin's phone buzzed on the desk. The vibration sounded loud against the wood. He checked it, then looked up, pale. "There's a reporter outside the gate," he said. "Live van." They heard Richard came home. Richard exhaled slowly, like the air was heavy. "Let them," he said. "We're not hiding." Clarice turned toward him. "If we go public," she said, "we go with proof, not suspicion." Richard nodded once. "Then we do it right." An hour later, the estate lawn was crowded with microphones and camera tripods. The winter air smelled like damp grass and engine exhaust from idling news vans. A line of staff stood near the foyer windows, watching from behind glass as if the outside world could shatter them. Clarice stood beside a folding table set up near the podium. On the table sat a small metal lockbox, a portable printer, and a laptop. The laptop fan whined softly, a nervous hum under the rising crowd noise. Special Agent Dorsey arrived in an unmarked vehicle, stepping out with the same calm weight she'd carried into the cafe. She nodded once at Clarice, then scanned the setup. "Show it clean," Dorsey said quietly. Chain matters. Clarice's fingers tightened around the handle of the lockbox. It will, she said. Richard stepped to the podium. The microphones bristled in front of him like a fence. Camera shutters clicked in a rapid stutter. The wind tugged at his coat. He didn't smile. 3 days ago, Richard said, voice slow and clear, I was nearly buried alive. Not by mistake, by intent. The crowd went silent in a way that didn't feel peaceful. Phones rose higher. A boom mic dipped closer, its foam head swaying slightly. Richard continued. Today, I'm alive, and we have evidence that what happened to me was part of a larger pattern. It's triary. Clarice felt the weight of every eye shift toward her. Richard turned slightly, gesturing to the table. This is Clarice Bennett, he said. She saved my life, and she uncovered documents that were never meant to see daylight. Clarice stepped forward. Her suit fit her like quiet armor. The bruise on her cheek had been covered, but its ache still lived under the makeup. She placed the lockbox on the table. Metal clinked. She opened it with a key. The latch snapped up with a sharp click. Inside sat a sealed evidence bag and a red USB drive in a clear sleeve, labeled with time and date in thick black ink. Clarice held it up so cameras could see the label. This USB contains scanned grant agreements and transfer logs pulled from the estate office today, she said, voice even. It also contains metadata showing the documents were backdated. A reporter shouted, How do we know it's real? Clarice set the USB sleeve on the table and slid it toward Dorsey. Dorsey put on gloves. The latex snapped. She lifted the sleeve, read the label out loud, then signed the chain of custody form on camera, pen scratching, paper steady. She stamped it with a portable stamp kit. The stamp thudded once, loud in the quiet. Clarice turned the laptop screen toward the cameras. Kevin mirrored the display onto a small portable monitor beside it. The numbers appeared large enough for the front row to read. A timestamp glowed in the corner of the metadata window, created 3 days ago, dated 15 years back. Clarice tapped the timestamp once. The click sounded sharp in the microphone pickup. This, Clarice said, is a lie with a date on it. A ripple moved through the crowd. Gasps, murmurs. A camera operator adjusted focus, the lens motor whining softly. Richard's voice came again, steadier now. We are ordering a full audit. We are turning over these materials to federal investigators, and we are asking anyone with knowledge of misconduct to come forward. If so can, sir, with problems are gated. Clarice felt the wind lift a strand of hair against her cheek. Cold air touched the skin near her bruise, and it grounded her. Dorsey leaned toward her, low enough that only Clarice could hear. This is the start, she said. Clarice stared out at the crowd, at the phones, the lenses, the faces hungry for a villain and a hero. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. A single vibration, sharp as a warning. Unknown number. Clarice didn't reach for it. She kept her hand on the table edge, knuckles firm. Because now the truth was on record. And someone out there had just realized she wasn't invisible anymore. The estate felt louder after the cameras left. Not with people, but with small sounds Clarice couldn't ignore anymore. The tick of the foyer clock, the soft groan of old floorboards, the hush of wind pressing against tall windows like a palm testing locks. Even the house's clean scent, polish, and cedar felt suspicious, like perfume over smoke. Clarice turned the converted library into a war room. Boxes lined the walls. A folding table held the lockbox, the sealed USB sleeve, and 3 clear evidence pouches stacked like thin bricks. Kevin sat on the floor beside a laptop, cables coiled around his ankles. The laptop fan whined steadily. Morales walked through once an hour with 2 plainclothes officers, checking doors and corners without announcing it. Each time, her radio gave a soft burst of static, then silence again. Richard hovered nearby, trying not to hover, his hands restless with useless energy. He kept looking at the boxes as if they might get up and run. Everything that leaves this room gets logged, Clarice said, snapping a tamper seal across a folder sleeve. The plastic strip made a sharp, final click. Time, date, hands. Kevin slid a printout across the table. The paper was warm from the printer, edges still slightly curled. Network logs, he said. Someone tried to access the grant drive right after the press conference ended. Clarice's eyes narrowed. From where? Kevin pointed. From inside the house. The login wasn't successful, but the attempt is there. Time-stamped. The timestamp sat on the page like a fingerprint. Richard leaned in, breathing shallow. Who has access? It's 7-day 2. Doing this fulls. More people than you want to admit, Morales said from the doorway. Her boots made a soft, controlled thud on the rug. Contractors, staff, Foundation volunteers, and anyone who stole a key card before the locks changed. Clarice looked at the library shelves, now half empty. The gaps felt like missing teeth. We moved the most critical copies off-site, Morales said. Tonight, Clarice nodded once. Now. Died. And she opened the lockbox, lifted a sealed pouch, and set it into a fireproof document bag. The bag's zipper rasped loudly in the quiet. She wrote across a label in thick black ink, pressed it onto the bag, then signed across the edge so any tampering would break her name. Morales watched. Good, she said. That's how you keep liars from rewriting the story. They were still working when it happened. 2:17 in the morning. A sharp, violent beep cut through the hallway, followed by a siren that seemed to rattle the house's bones. Red lights began pulsing along the ceiling, painting the walls in urgent flashes. Clarice jolted upright from the chair she'd been refusing to call a bed. The smell hit before the sound fully registered. Smoke. Not faint. Not imagined. Real, sharp chemical biting the back of her throat. She grabbed the fireproof bag by its handle and ran. Bare feet slapped the wood floor. The alarm screamed overhead. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door slammed. Staff voices rose, panicked and confused, muffled by distance. Richard appeared at the top of the staircase, coughing, his eyes wide. The flashing red light made his face look hollow. "The library!" he shouted, voice raw. "The archives!" Clarice was already moving. Her lungs burned as she pushed down the hallway. Smoke thickened, turning the air into a gritty fog. The heat climbed fast, pressing against her skin. The library doors were open. Flames crawled up the corner wall near the network closet, licking at drapes like hungry fingers. The crackle was loud, alive. The smoke smelled wrong, too sweet, too fast, like someone had fed the fire on purpose. Clarice pulled her sleeve over her nose and mouth. The fabric tasted like detergent and panic. "Clarice!" Richard grabbed her arm. His grip was weak but desperate. "We have to go." 8. "There's still time," she snapped, and her voice came out harsher than she meant. She yanked free and ran for the metal file cabinets. Kevin stumbled in behind them, eyes watering. "Sprinklers aren't activating," he coughed. "I don't hear water." Clarice hit the wall switch. Nothing. No hiss. No spray. Only the alarm and the roar. Morales appeared in the doorway, gun drawn low, scanning the room with a practiced sweep even as smoke rolled around her. "Out!" she barked. "Now!" 1. Clarice ripped open the top drawer of the nearest cabinet. Files inside were already warm. She shoved stacks into the fireproof bag she'd grabbed earlier, her gloves slick with sweat. Paper edges scraped her wrists. The cabinet handle burned her palm through the glove. Richard coughed hard, then grabbed a second stack. His hands shook, but he kept stuffing. He moved like someone refusing to be helpless again. The fire surged, the sound deepening into a hungry whoosh. Heat slapped Clarice's face. Her eyes stung so badly, tears spilled without permission. Morales' radio crackled. "Fire department en route. 2 minutes out." 2 minutes is a lifetime," Clarice rasped. A small pop sounded near the network closet, like a fuse giving up. Kevin flinched back. Clarice jammed the last folder into the bag, yanked the zipper closed, and signed her name across the seal with a marker she kept clipped inside. The marker squeaked on the bag's surface. "Go!" Morales shouted. They ran. The hallway felt longer than it ever had. Smoke chased them like a living thing. A staff member screamed somewhere near the foyer. The alarm kept screaming back. Outside, cold air hit Clarice like a slap. She dropped to the grass, clutching the bag to her chest, coughing until her ribs ached. The lawn smelled of wet earth and gasoline from arriving engines. Fire trucks rolled in with roaring motors and flashing lights. Hoses uncoiled. Water finally thundered through the house as firefighters stormed inside, Boots splashing, radios barking orders. Richard sank beside Clarice, breathing in rough bursts. Soot streaked his cheek. He stared at the mansion like he was watching a myth burn. "It was deliberate," Clarice said, voice low, steady despite the tremor in her hands. Morales crouched in front of them, face lit by the strobe of emergency lights. "Accelerant," she said after a quick glance toward the open door. "And someone disabled the security cameras manually." Clarice's stomach dropped. "They knew where to hit." Morales nodded. "They knew your schedule." Kevin stumbled onto the lawn, coughing, laptop hugged to his chest like it was a lifeline. "I pulled the last 30 minutes of access logs before the power cut," he wheezed. "Someone used a key card on the east hallway door, time-stamped." Clarice lifted her head. The cold air burned her lungs, but her eyes stayed locked on Kevin. "Show me," she said. Kevin flipped the laptop open. The screen brightness stabbed through the dark. A log line glowed in stark text, with a timestamp and an access ID. Clarice stared at it until the numbers stopped looking like noise and started looking like a hand reaching through the dark. Morales leaned in, eyes narrowing. "That's not a contractor ID," she said. "That's staff." Clarice's fingers tightened around the fireproof bag handle until her knuckles ached. The flames inside the house were shrinking now under the assault of water, but Clarice didn't feel relief. She felt clarity. Someone had tried to erase the truth. And by trying, they had just left a trail with a timestamp on it. Morales straightened, already reaching for her radio. "Lock the property down," she said. "No one leaves. Not tonight." Clarice stood slowly, soot on her skin, smoke in her hair, the evidence bag heavy and real in her grip. Richard looked at her, eyes hollow but alive. "How deep is this?" he asked. Clarice didn't look back at the burning doorway. "Deep enough," she said, voice calm and edged with steel, "that they're scared of paper." Dawn came thin and colorless, like the sky hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. Clarice stood on the back lawn with the fireproof bag still in her hands, the strap cutting a red line into her palm. The mansion behind her looked wounded, blackened window frames, wet stone, a faint smell of scorched wood clinging to the air beneath the sharper odor of hose water and chemical foam. Firefighters packed up in tired silence. Their boots left dark prints in the grass. A last coil of hose slapped against metal as it was loaded, the sound flat and final. Morales walked the perimeter with 2 officers, flashlight beams still sweeping the fence line even though the sun was creeping up. Kevin sat on the steps with his laptop open, face lit by the screen, eyes red from smoke and sleeplessness. Richard stood a few feet away, shoulders squared in a coat that still smelled faintly of hospital. His gaze kept drifting to the damaged wing, like his mind was trying to rebuild what his eyes refused to accept. Clarice set the bag on the table on the patio. The zipper rasped when she opened it. The sealed sleeves inside were streaked with soot, but intact. She pulled one out and laid it flat. Morales stepped closer. "Accelerant confirmed," she said. "Arson units on it, and the camera system was disabled manually." Clarice didn't blink. Someone had access. Morales nodded. "And they left a trail." Kevin raised a hand without looking up. "I pulled the keycard logs," he said. "East hallway door, 2:17 a.m., staff credential." He turned the screen toward them. The timestamp glowed. A line of numbers sat beside it like a name that refused to speak. Richard leaned in, lips parting slightly. "Whose credential?" he asked. Kevin swallowed. "Miranda's." The air went still. Even the birds in the trees seemed quieter. Richard's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping once. "She was Marjorie's," he said. "Still loyal," Morales replied. "Or scared. Or paid." Clarice looked toward the house. In her mind, she could see Miranda's crossed arms, that curl of contempt, the casual way she'd called Clarice a maid, as if it was the end of every argument. Clarice reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over a number saved under one word: Dorsey. Morales watched her. "You sure you want to make that call now?" Clarice's voice stayed even. "They tried to burn the record," she said. "That means the record works." She hit call. Dorsey answered on the first ring. "Bennett." Clarice spoke slowly so every word landed. "Arson. At the estate. Accelerant. Cameras disabled. Key card log ties to Miranda. We saved the primary files. I'm turning over the off-site backups today. A pause. A breath on the line. Then Dorsey's voice hardened. Do not move those alone. I won't, Clarice said. Good, Dorsey replied. We're bringing a federal evidence team. Chain of custody stays clean. And Clarice, another pause. This escalates. Clarice's eyes stayed on the house. I know. She ended the call. The screen went dark. Richard's voice came low. What happens now? Clarice turned to him. His eyes were tired, but there was something new there, too, a steadiness that hadn't existed before the grave, before the smoke. We let the system do its part, Clarice said, and we keep doing ours. Morales stepped back, scanning the yard again. We'll take Miranda in, she said, and anyone else who looks like a match. Richard's mouth tightened. If she did this, he said, she didn't do it alone. Clarice didn't answer right away. She walked to the edge of the patio where the grass met the garden beds. Overnight, the rain and hose water had turned the soil dark and heavy. The scent of earth rose clean and honest, cutting through smoke. She crouched and pressed her fingers into the dirt. It was cold. It was real. It didn't pretend. Richard came closer. What are you doing? Clarice stood and brushed her hands together, soil clinging under her nails. Starting over, she said. A landscaper crew had already removed the dead rose bushes weeks earlier at Richard's request, the thorny stems stacked like broken bones. Beside them, new saplings waited in burlap wraps, dogwood, peony, lavender, something softer, something that didn't draw blood just to exist. Clarice picked up a small trowel from a garden cart. The metal felt solid in her hand. She held it out to Richard. He stared at it, confused. You want me to dig? I want you to do something that isn't paperwork, Clarice said. Something you can feel. Richard let out a short breath that almost became a laugh, then took the trowel. His hands shook slightly as he gripped it, but he didn't let go. They knelt side by side in the wet soil. The first scoop came up heavy and dark, a soft rip as roots gave way. The sound was quiet, intimate, nothing like alarms or sirens. Clarice dug with her hands when the dirt clumped, pulling small stones free and setting them aside with deliberate care. Morales watched from a few steps away, radio murmuring quietly at her shoulder. Kevin closed his laptop for a moment and just stared at the garden like he didn't understand how life kept going after fire. Richard placed the first sapling into the hole. His fingers lingered on the burlap wrap, then he pulled it back slowly, careful not to tear the thin roots. Clarice packed soil around it with both palms, pressing firm until it stood upright. The dogwood didn't look like much yet, just a thin trunk, bare branches, but it held. Richard's voice came out rough. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't. Clarice cut him off gently, not unkind. Don't, she said. You're here. That's what matters. Richard swallowed. He pressed soil down again, hands dirty now, and something about the sight of it made him look less like a man behind a name and more like a person. Morales's phone buzzed. She listened, then looked over. Federal team is 10 minutes out, she said. Dorsey's bringing the evidence van. Clarice stood slowly, knees stiff, hands caked with mud. She looked at the mansion again, at the blackened frame of the library window. The house was quieter now, not peaceful, just waiting. Clarice wiped her hands on her coat and turned back to the garden. One sapling stood in the center like a promise that had to be earned. Richard straightened beside her. His hands were still dirty. He didn't wipe them. Clarice lifted her gaze to the pale sky. The smoke smell was fading but not gone. Under it, the damp earth smelled like a beginning. And somewhere beyond the gates, the people who had tried to burn the truth were still breathing. Clarice's voice came out low, steady, and final. Truth leaves footprints.